Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman.
And I'm Richard Bimmer.
And welcome to episode 22 of Rolling Release, our podcast about the perpetual improvement of Linux. How you doing this week, Richard?
Pretty good.
All right, it's been a little while since we've done an episode, and these episodes are going to get a little bit shorter just to let everyone know that's the only way we can continue doing them. But there was some news in the past few weeks that we would like to tell you all about, and we're going to just jump right in. Richard, the first story that we're talking about today is GNOME's new client-side decorations initiative. Have you heard about this? I guess
yes,
probably.
I read this article.
Okay, great. So I have the biggest issue with everything in this article. I want to get that out there so that I'm not salty throughout the entire article. Just, you know, if I was trying to portray this as if I was unbiased, it would not come across very well. So I've highlighted the TLDR here. Let's get rid of title bars. Richard, what do you think about that? Just if I said GNOME is getting rid of title bars now.
Yeah, I was not for it when I read this article.
Yeah, getting rid of title bars. They're literally every desktop environment has title bars and has had title bars for decades. But GNOME says, unless you're one of a very lucky few, you probably use apps with title bars. And they say title bars are the largely empty bars at the top of some application windows. They're very inflexible as they cannot contain any additional UI elements other than what the desktop environment puts there. So my biggest problem with most of the assertions in this article is that they stem from this idea that title bars are largely empty and they cannot contain additional UI elements. And you know why I have a problem with those is because the reason why they're mostly empty is because GNOME made them mostly empty with GNOME 3. They made a really ugly theme that makes title bars look terrible, and then they made title bars have no additional UI elements by putting nothing there but one X button. You know, that's GNOME's fault. They made an issue, and now they're trying to solve it upstream, even though they caused the issue, and they didn't have to. So they make these assertions about how title bars are good for nothing, which, by the way, I'd like to point out I'm using KDE, and as you can see, my title bar right here on Firefox, it looks just fine. You know, it's the same color, it matches my tabs. I know, Richard, you can't see my screen right now, but the audience can. Additionally, I'll get into this a little bit more later, but KDE does put additional UI elements on the title bar. For one thing, we've got the maximize and minimize, which GNOME has simplified out of their desktop environment.
Another thing is you have the file, the edit, view, all that stuff is like next to it as well. And that drop down with the hamburger style menu on the left.
Oh, what app are you talking about?
Well, I have Firefox right now in KDE, and like next to the Firefox icon, I have the little hamburger icon and the file, edit, view, history. So you can access all that from there. That's
on the left side for you? That's on the right side for me. And I don't have a file button. Well, that's interesting. I think that's part of Firefox's decoration, though, but KDE, they put this icon in the top left that you click it, and you get options to move to different screens. And you can also resize your window. You can check a box to have no border right there. And that's on every single window that displays in Plasma. Do you have that icon at the top left?
Where does it look like?
It's just the application icon. For every application on my Plasma desktop, I've got...
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
But then you have the no border option.
Right, it's a standard. It's got all kinds of stuff you can do in there, and Plasma puts it on every single screen. That's an example of a desktop environment making good use of title bars. GNOME chooses to make bad use of title bars, so now they're trying to get people to get rid of title bars. So they're trying to replace title bars with what they call header bars, and header bars are client-side decorations, and we're already familiar with those. Client-side decorations are drawn by the app rather than the display server. So a title bar is managed by the display server, and the desktop environment puts it there using the display server, whereas client-side decorations, it shifts that responsibility. It takes the control away from your desktop environment and gives it to your application developer, because we've got this mantra of application developers know best, and they need all the power over users and over distributions, and now over desktop environments as well.
And I mean, yeah, if they're talking about a unified look, that really kind of hurts having a unified look at all, because then they can do whatever they want, really.
Exactly.
With their client-side decorations. applications per each app, and so it doesn't seem to be one seamless environment anymore.
Yeah, and they even mention that later in the article, and they just gloss over it. They do say all GNOME apps, except for Terminal, have moved.
Like, not even all GNOME apps.
Not even all GNOME apps. Their own, this is what they are trying to say all applications should do, and they haven't even done it on all of their apps. But most of their apps have moved over to header bars, but some apps have not moved over to header bars, and they include some really niche apps like LibreOffice, Inkscape, and Blender, which are also powerhouses for Linux media development. But LibreOffice, probably out of those three, is the most well-used. And you got to ask yourself, if three of the most popular Linux applications aren't doing what you're wanting people to do, is it really a good idea to try and get all Linux applications to do that? If the three most popular ones are choosing not to for some reason, probably because they think that it's not the right way to go. They say there are ways to hide title bars. You know, they say, oh, title bars are ugly, they don't have any functionality because that's the way they made them. There are ways to hide title bars, but they don't work on Wayland. Note, they're talking about GNOME Shell on Wayland, and at the bottom of this article, there's a footnote talking about how KDE does have that ability on Wayland. GNOME doesn't. So that's just...
So again, it's stuff they could fix that they're in control of.
Yeah.
That they're trying to use as a justification for why everyone should change.
Yeah. So this is their new client-side decoration initiative. They say the only way to solve this problem long-term is to patch applications upstream to not use title bars. So they're going to try and go around to every single application ever and patch it to not use title bars. Not patch it, but actually get the developer to change it to not use title bars.
Which they mentioned is actually a quite complicated thing, particularly if you're using like older versions like GTK2. They said you have to update to GTK3.
You can't use older versions of GTK2 anymore. You have to. This is them saying you have to upgrade with us now. Just like Snaps say you have to upgrade with us. Interesting. Once again, giving developers of the end user apps all the control and taking away control from all these pieces of the infrastructure that have been put in place over the years. But they say Firefox and Chromium have both gotten client-side decoration support already. Chromium actually does it really well. And you know why they do it well is because there's a checkbox in the settings menu that you can check to have client-side decorations, or you can uncheck the box and have regular title bars. They talk about the option later in the article, not here yet, but Richard, do you know what I'm talking about, that checkbox in Chrome or Chromium?
Actually not really, because I haven't used Chrome recently.
The option's not called client-side decorations. The option is called like use system title bars. But if you uncheck use system title bars, then you get client-side decorations. I'm most okay with that, because then at least when I'm on my desktop environment that uses title bars, I can select to use system title bars because it looks better that way when your desktop environment uses title bars in a sane manner. Firefox currently has an experimental client-side decoration build that they've been working on for a while. And they've been having some... I've been following Firefox implementing these because people have been asking for it from Firefox for a while. And they are not having a super easy time making it work well, but they are getting there.
I mean, in Quantum on Windows, it has a client-side decorations, right? Because it'll have the X button at the same level as the tabs, which I assume is client-side decorations.
Yeah, and you know, GNOME makes a good point there, that a lot of apps on Windows, and here in their blog post, they actually talk about Mac OS, where a lot of, like, Telegram on Mac OS uses client-side decorations, Telegram on Linux doesn't. But, you know, that's might be because Mac OS doesn't have protocols in place to handle title bars between several desktop environments like Linux does. Linux is unique. That's why we have things set up the way we have them set up. But yeah, you're right. Windows and Mac OS both, there are some applications that use client-side decorations on them.
And that I'm kind of split on, because it does look nicer, but it loses the unified look and feel across the entire operating system, in that all the apps now look different at the top, and they don't really have any common elements to them anymore.
Yeah, and you know, the very next paragraph discusses exactly what you're talking about. So they say, what's our goal here? They do say an interesting thing. So obviously GNOME tries to get people to write apps in GTK. They say if an app uses GTK, we want it to respect the GNOME human interface guidelines. So that right there, if I was an application developer being asked to follow GNOME's human interface guidelines would kind of scare me away from using GTK. I just want to throw that out. But a couple lines later, they say, we're aiming for functional, not visual consistency. They say function over form. This is GNOME we're talking about. This is the people who
removed desktop icons.
They removed desktop icons last week. They removed everything from the title bars a few years ago. I mean, what else have they done? They removed most system panels. They removed the system tray. But function over form, guys. You know, we're aiming for functional, not visual consistency. That's why we've been stripping out everything to make them all look the same, is because we're aiming for functional and not visual consistency. And they say the goal is for as many apps as possible to have the following properties. No title bar, we said that already. Native looking close, maximize, minimize icons, which you're not going to get because they say it's fine if an Electron app has custom close, maximize, minimize icons as long as they use the same metaphors as the native icons. So they say right there, it's fine if they're not native looking. And then what are our goals? Native looking. So they're losing me there. This was the most interesting point that under their goals. Respect the setting for showing / hiding, minimize, and maximize. So GNOME tried to get rid of minimize.
Isn't that by default?
They respects the setting. So GNOME by default turns those off. So they want all apps to have them off by default unless you install GNOME Tweak Tool, which we know never gets features removed or anything like that. And they want.
There is even a setting currently for that?
There is.
I didn't know you could actually show them.
Yeah, there's a setting in GNOME Tweak Tool to show minimize and maximize buttons. But, to be fair, I get it. In GNOME, I didn't use that setting when I used GNOME because you don't need those in GNOME. You just drag things to other virtual desktops. But it seems like this entire thing is just trying to get things to work better on GNOME. We want every application to look like GNOME apps on GNOME because they want everyone to, by default, hide their minimize and maximize buttons because that's what GNOME does by default. They don't care about the fact that this is completely useless for other desktop environments that use those buttons. It is
well,
not.
I mean, it would only be respecting it on GNOME, right? So if you use that same app on another one, like KDE, it should show it.
Right, it would show it because KDE would have those things shown. But then you've got the other issues with client-side decorations, like they don't always look correct on KDE, which I will bring up an example of in a minute here. But the next line here respects the setting for buttons to be on the left or right side of the window. That's the only thing that's the only saving grace that I find in all of this. I can agree that applications, you should be able to
that
move.
Would be really annoying, yeah.
Your plus. Here's the thing though, KDE has the option to move those icons over to the left side of the window, and it works already with all of the programs because it's not at the application level. The desktop environment is doing it. Because that's how title bars work.
If you don't use client-side decorations, you don't even have to worry about that because the desktop environment itself will respect that because it's running.
Yeah, they're creating problems for their solutions, and they're creating even more problems out of their solutions. It's all right. Which apps are affected? Basically, all applications not using GTK3 are affected.
Even a few that use it.
I've got a quote here. And excuse my language, but they literally say, quote, "Holy shit, we have to redesign the entire app." That is a quote in this article where some developers are going to have to say that because this is how big of a thing, this is how big of a change they're wanting application developers to make. They say GTK3 apps are relatively easy to port to header bars. GTK2 apps need to be ported to GTK3. If you're using Electron or you're using Qt,
you're really out of luck.
Good luck. Yeah, they're actually, they talk about later here, a little later, I'll get to it, but they talk about actually changing Qt to support CSD. They're actually trying that. So
at the upstream level, I guess?
Yeah, like going upstream to Qt and changing the way things work so that you can use client-side decorations, which to GNOME I say good luck with that. They give an example of what Telegram would look like. So they've got a screenshot of Telegram with the current title bar. They've got a screenshot of Telegram with no title bar and a client-side decoration X. And personally, I just don't like the look of applications on GNOME, and this Telegram now looks like a GNOME app that don't have title bars. I mean, are you looking at the screenshot, Richard?
Yeah, I'm out on it right now.
What do you think about it? Do you think?
Yeah, that's one of the things I feel like is visual consistency would be nice across it, and also like the same spot. So with title bars, all the X buttons, and I prefer the minimize and maximize buttons, but all of them would be in the same spot because I don't want to have to be clicking or looking in different places in every app to access that. So I would prefer definitely the title bars.
Yeah, even just the name of the app at the top, like that's something, you know, it says Telegram at the top of the top screenshot that's current, and then what they're proposing, it doesn't say Telegram at the top. So if you are a user sitting down at someone else's computer and that someone else has Telegram running, and they say, oh, click on Telegram, how do you know what to click on if you've never used Telegram before?
Yeah,
so I've got Telegram here also. I'd like to point out, I do agree that the title bar looks ugly on the current screenshot for Telegram. Here's what Telegram looks like on my computer, though, showing the viewers right now. As you can see, on KDE Plasma, with my nice dark theme, I've got the close button, maximize, minimize. I've got a much smaller bar because GNOME is the reason why GNOME's title bars are so big and clunky. KDE has appropriately sized title bars, and then on the left we've got the icon. Once again, I can move to different screens. If I was using virtual desktops, I can move to different virtual desktops. I've got all kinds of different actions I can do here. That is a consistent thing that is on every single program running on my system, and no one wants to throw all that consistency out the window. So they say, how can I help with the client-side decoration initiative? You can talk to your maintainers and, quote, convince them that this is a good idea. Which the fact that they say they need help convincing people that this is a good idea is a little telling. They say we need to evaluate what we can do at the toolkit level to make it easier to implement in Electron or Qt apps. They know that, like, this isn't how some applications work, but I really am curious. I'm gonna watch the Qt mailing lists, and when the GNOME developers come in and say, hey, we want you to be more like GTK, we'll see how that works out for them. I mean, Electron
should be an entertaining read.
Electron is one thing, but Qt, it really should be entertaining. Because Qt is like cross-platform way more than GTK is. So they've got to worry about other things. Like they've got to worry about operating systems that don't even run GNOME. So they're going to have some decent arguments against this that are much more technical than my arguments. So that'll be interesting. And they say they're call to action. They say, are you a designer who would like to help redesign apps? And I read that, I'm like, oh God, no. Because every time that I've seen a quote unquote designer come in, you remember when the KDE project got that new designer to come in and redesign the settings center, and then they got rid of like buttons and things like that.
They completely forgot to even include them in the
They forgot to include buttons, and they're not a developer. They're just that is their job, is to design, and they didn't really do that very well. I don't trust like quote unquote designers. I'm not for giving developers 100% total control over users, but like I know developers know what they're talking about. Designers don't always.
I mean, it needs to be a team effort. I think you need to have a designer and a developer working together, like directly with each other, in order to have something that comes out well, in my view.
Yeah, or like a developer who understands some design, something like that. Like you develop your website, right? Do you have like a designer that helps you with that, or do you do the design for your websites that you program yourself?
I do the design for the website myself, and I did have to read it's still nowhere as good as I wanted, and ultimately I would like to get someone to help me with the design for it. Obviously, I don't have really the budget or the time at the moment to do that. But I ended up reading some design articles and stuff and trying to find some information on what was the best way to look and improve it overall.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's really important to. Obviously, I can see how there's definitely a need for people who specialize in design, but they need to be working with people who know the actual technical stuff as well, and the best way to implement it, where you end up just completely forgetting apparently buttons and their necessity, or a search. They completely forgot that you might want to search your settings menu for settings.
Yeah.
That might be handy when you have 500 options.
Yeah. So if you are a designer who thinks this is a good idea, you can hit up the GNOME project and see where you can help out. Now, they did get understandably some backlash from posting this blog post. and they posted an update at the bottom, which is interesting. They say, as people have pointed out, it is possible to add server-side decoration support via protocol extensions in Wayland. KDE has proposed such a protocol. And by the way, protocol extensions are a big thing in Wayland. Like, the fact that it's an extension, this isn't like GNOME extensions where it's going to break in a version. Wayland, like, is built on extensions. Like, it is a protocol, and protocol extensions are how Wayland is going to work. So that's a legitimate way to go. And KDE, you know, like I said, KDE has proposed a protocol extension to add server-side decoration support. They say, however, GNOME Shell does not support it, which is GNOME Shell's problem, in my opinion. They say at the bottom, the goal of this initiative is for GNOME users to get a better experience. Also, which I don't necessarily like the wording of, because it implies that they don't care about people not using GNOME. And then, like I said, the very last sentence in this entire thing is like the one thing that I'm okay with. This doesn't preclude applications from having title bars on different desktops or having a preference for this like Chromium does. You know, like I said, I'm okay with the way Chromium does, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Having an option to turn title bars on or off. But the fact that GNOME is advocating for function over form, and GNOME is advocating for adding preferences, you know, I'm not sure how legitimate they're actually going to try and implement those preferences when they're going upstream and talking to developers. And if I was a developer developing a small Linux app, or even a large one, you know, I don't know how much work it would be to maintain different versions of your app for different desktop environments, which is something we're trying to avoid as we move into Wayland. We're trying to avoid making app developers do that, but this is going to be one more thing they have to worry about in terms of fragmentation between different desktops. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nicer to not even have to, as like when you're developing some app or trying to throw a prototype together, to not even have to worry about client-side decorations and that stuff in the beginning, and just use the desktop environment to manage the title bars for you.
Or if you do use client-side decorations, you're not going to want to also maintain like a separate fork with server-side decorations.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. It seems like GNOME is like, they want to unify everything by fragmenting it so badly that we have no choice but to go to the most used thing, which is GNOME. That's what a lot of the things they do feel like to me. But you can go, and this blog post will be linked in the show notes on our website, so you can check that out if you want to hear more about it. Let's get a little more positive in here. Richard, you're going to talk about the Librem 5, right? What's going on with that?
All right. So yeah, I don't know, it was a lot of episodes back, but we were talking about how the Librem 5, I think, finally got funded in the Kickstarter. And so they've actually released new progress reports since then, which was pretty cool. And they've been some pretty interesting reads. They got a new team, so they actually apparently got over 100 applicants for like paid things, and they narrowed it down to 15 people.
Yeah.
So, and they got them all on board as of January 2018. So they've got a good like paid team working together by now on this, which is pretty cool. They're also saying now they're looking for volunteers that they're like going to accept them now that they've gotten their core team. So that's pretty cool. But one of the main things I wanted to talk about, and at least from Progress Report 1, is originally they were going to use the IMX6 as the chip, and the main thing they wanted to use this for was it supported the GPU driver at Naviv, and which worked, I guess, very well with their current setup and their plans. But it looks like they're planning on using the IMX8 because that was announced at CES recently, and so they think it should be able to be available certainly by the time they're trying to go to production. So that would bring the specs up and the power a lot more, which would be pretty cool to have it even be more powerful than it was originally planned to be.
Yeah.
And then they also talked about the display. So they kind of they're working with their partners, which they mentioned is GNOME, KDE, Matrix, Nextcloud, and Monero. And they're working to create a proper UI and UX for a phone screen. So the screen was going to be between 5 inches and 5.5 inches diagonally, and they're going to have a 1920 by 1080p and a full functional touchscreen. I feel like 1920 by 1080 actually seems somewhat low. I feel like the latest flagship.
I'm not sure what. I think my OnePlus 5T here is 1080, and this was a flagship that came out last year and received critically acclaimed reviews. Personally, with mobile phones, I think that like 4K screens are a little excessive, because when you've got a 17-inch screen that's 1080p and it's usable, if you shrink that down to 5 inches, I don't think you're going to be able to see the pixels either way, no matter how much smaller you make them. That's just my personal thought on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's quite as high as the flagships right now, but it still seems decent. And I mean, I think it's still higher than the iPhone, certainly the iPhone 7 that I'm using by a fairly large margin. And then they have mentioned they have a development board that currently is running the mainline kernel with Wayland UI, which is pretty cool. And they kind of then talk about they've been looking at some different potential manufacturing sites. They don't really have anything final yet on it, but they were like looking around, I think 80 potential fabricators they mentioned.
Yeah.
They're also still looking to work with some other partners. But it was a good first update, and I'm going to cover the second progress report as well because that was interesting. Yeah. But it was definitely, they covered a lot of key points. It's giving me some good confidence in this project overall because they seem to clearly have an idea what they're doing.
I did find it interesting. Were you going to talk about the bit at the bottom about working with GNOME?
Oh, no, I didn't see that part.
Okay, it's just under cooperative relationships. It's kind of a throwaway line. They say our UI UX design team, along with phone dev team, are working with the GNOME UI UX team. And it's interesting because during their campaign, KDE actually came forward and partnered with them first, and then GNOME didn't do it until like a week later when they said, oh, I want a piece of this too. I think part of the reason might be because PureOS on desktop uses GNOME. So Purism probably wants to have GNOME by default on their phone, or they want to have GNOME supported on their phone so that there's consistency for Purism users, which they talk about in the next article, and you can talk about that. But I do hope that KDE and Plasma do stay in the picture throughout the development.
I feel like, were they planning on having both?
They were planning on having both, was what they said before.
And KDE.
Yeah, that's what they said during it. But in this article, they say our design team is working with GNOME, and then we're planning to work with KDE at some point. So I just want to keep a close eye on that.
Yeah, somewhat conflicting with the next article. So the next article, they talk about, it's called the Design Team Assembles, and this was January 24th, so this is pretty recent. Mm-hmm. And basically, it was pretty cool. They talk about how they've hired a UI and UX designer and a new web designer.
Yeah, and that UI UX designer is the one who made, you remember when the Librem 5 campaign first launched, the renders they had looked terrible, and then they replaced them with better looking renders a couple weeks later. This guy apparently was the one who made those better looking concept art that's actually what they're basing the phone off of now.
So yeah, hopefully I think that bodes well for them overall.
Yeah.
But I was actually really happy with how they have clearly tackled UI and UX so early on, because I feel like this could definitely be something that could make or break if you're trying to get more casual people into this market to use this phone who aren't just like Linux fans who use this all the time. This could be something that could make or break the experience, because if it's a really clunky experience where like everything's 10 menus down and it's just really hard to figure out how to use your phone, that is the most noticeable on like a small screen if you have a clunky experience. It's not quite as noticeable on a desktop or on a laptop, but it's really noticeable on a phone where you're going to have to like tap through 8 menus to get through stuff. So I'm happy they're tackling this so early. And the initial renders looked really good. I don't know if you've scrolled down to the bottom where it has the button and states and the chat application, the contacts application. But what's interesting is they very much look like KDE.
You know,
like they're very similar to Plasma looking.
It's interesting you say that. I didn't think they looked like KDE when I saw them. They might look like the newer KDE apps, like the News Settings Center and Discover and things. I didn't think they looked like traditional KDE apps, though. I thought they looked a lot like Windows Phone, personally. Which isn't a bad thing, because Windows Phone, even though they didn't have a lot of apps available, the design for Windows Phone was pretty striking. I remember back in the day, years ago, I actually jailbroke my iPod Touch and installed a bunch of Windows Phone themes on top of it because I thought it looked cool. So I think it's neat, that resemblance. Do you see it at all, or do you not think so?
Yeah, I haven't actually used Windows Phone before, so I've just seen like a couple of times I've seen it in person, but yeah, I don't have a whole lot of background with it to be able to compare it to. But yeah, I feel like just I don't know, it was more just the icons, like the back arrow looks very similar to KDE.
Yeah, you're right there.
A lot of the icons look like they were directly ripped from KDE.
Yeah.
And one thing they do talk about that was somewhat worrisome to me is they mentioned a unified look for PureOS devices.
Yeah, that was worrisome to you?
Quote, it was in some way, because their quote they mentioned specifically, our approach to convergence is that mobile is the motivating factor for all other platforms.
Okay.
And that line was worrisome to me, because I feel like you too often mess up a window, like a laptop. I mean, a laptop or desktop environment because you're trying to make it touch friendly to the point that, like, for example, with Windows 10, the fact that when I'm using a mouse to unlock my computer, I have to grab on the bottom and drag all the way up to the top of the screen.
Yeah.
Which just seems so weird and counterintuitive on a mouse and keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then their screenshot, so I don't know if you can bring up the screenshot of their laptop and like that they have on there, looks pretty good. And then it doesn't look like that Windows 10 lock screen. It has a very like friendly desktop looking feel.
Yeah.
Everything kind of, it uses the space properly. It doesn't just have giant text or fill it up. Like it seems like everything's kind of spread out.
You're looking at the lock screen.
Well.
There is a lot of blank space, but it is a lock screen at the same time. They do use GNOME, like I said, by default on Pure OS, and it looks like they've got some extensions or something installed, at least a theme. So yeah, that's interesting.
That has definitely the colors of KDE Dark. Like the dark KDE Plasma theme. It's using the same colors of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely GNOME. They make it look better in KDE's dark theme is definitely a whole lot better than GNOME's light by default theme, but yeah.
But I think that's really all that came out of the article to me, mainly because this was more just talking about design.
Yeah,
overall.
I mean, they mentioned.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, they mentioned they were starting work on a dark theme, and then the light one's going to come later. I think that's really interesting because everyone loves dark themes, you know? And I don't know if I've ever heard anyone come out and say, I'm doing the dark theme first, and then I'll worry about the light theme later. I think that's probably smart because I care more about the dark theme. I think a lot of people do. And that's another thing. Windows Phone basically had a dark theme by default, whereas, you know, Android, it's light by default.
I mean, it's really handy if they end up using an OLED display because, like...
Oh, yeah, then you're getting battery savings and things.
Yeah, you could literally just save battery. And I mean, for example, Apple really still does not have a proper dark mode on iOS 11, even with now the fact that the iPhone 10 uses a OLED display, where you could definitely gain some, like, you could definitely save some battery by having a dark theme across the entire thing. So it's cool if they're starting with a dark theme first, because I feel like that's actually the thing people want probably more overall.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, they also mention, they say KDE already has a beautiful and fully featured mobile interface. GNOME's developers' resources have not been focused on mobile user experience. So that's apparently why they're aiding GNOME right now and not specifically KDE. So yeah, I'll be on the lookout for more updates. I definitely like the updates though. Cool to see how it's progressing.
Yeah, it's given me a lot of confidence in the project, so I'm pretty happy with it.
All right, and our next story is about Wine. This is a pretty short story, but I think it's pretty big. Wine 3.0 came out a few weeks ago. Don't know if you saw that, or do you use Wine? Have you ever used it for anything?
I have never been able to consistently get it to work, so I will let you take this article for the most part.
Yeah, I have very little experience with Wine. I was not able to get it to work with some music production software I tried to a while ago. I did get it to work with a video game called EVE Online for a while, but I only used it for like a month because I only played the video game as long as I had a free trial. But yeah, the Wine is it's not an emulator, but it's a compatibility layer that lets you run some Windows programs on Linux and also Mac OS. And Wine 3.0 just came out. A lot of people use Wine for video games, and 3.0 is a big deal because it includes Direct3D 10 and 11 support. And Direct3D is the 3D portion of DirectX. So if your video game, or if a video game you play is using DirectX 10 or 11, previously you could only go up to 9 with Wine, and then after that you couldn't really run 3D games that required higher versions of DirectX. Now you'll be able to run some of those newer games. I think GTA 5 is one of the ones that you couldn't run before, but now you can. I'm really interested to see if Overwatch runs with this. Personally, I'd really like to do a video just seeing what video games I can get to work in Wine, because I've got a lot of friends who I talk to about Linux a lot, and they understand why Linux is better than Windows, but they just are too weak with regards to holding on to their video games, and they play their video games so often that that's what's keeping them on Windows. So I'd really like to take a look at Wine personally and test out the performance and things. But yeah, you got DirectX 10 and 11 support with 3D. You've also got an Android graphics driver, and there will be more about that in a minute. They have deferred DirectX 12 and Vulkan to the next version of Wine, which won't be out for another year. However, if your game is in Vulkan, hopefully it'll have a native Linux port anyway. That's part of the reason Vulkan is a good thing for Linux, because it's not as hard to port. Whereas DirectX, there's no DirectX for Linux.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, from what I've heard, Vulkan seems to be a lot better than DirectX.
Yeah.
Not just in Linux support, but
just in general
efficiency and overall optimization. Yeah,
definitely. But that's why I don't think it's super terrible that they don't have Vulkan support in Wine specifically. But yeah, that should be next year, they say. This year, though, like I said, DirectX 10 and 11, you can go, and I'll link the release notes down in the show notes if you want to read about all the specific things. I don't know what a lot of this stuff is specifically. Richard might know a little bit more, but probably video game developers are going to be the most apt at reading that stuff. Like I mentioned, though, there's some Android support in this newest version of Wine. You can actually build Wine now as an APK package, and you run it on Android to run Windows applications on Android. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they've got audio working, they've got graphics working. Now, right now, only OpenGL is supported on Android, no DirectX on Android yet. But yeah, they're saying addressed during the next development cycle for DirectX on Android. Kernel-wise, it's interesting. Previously, the default version of Windows on Wine was Windows XP, and you can change it to whatever you want. But the default version is now set to Windows 7, starting with 3.0, which is still really old, but it makes sense because, I mean, the older Windows versions are easier to fake because they're less complicated. And Windows 7 has been out for long enough now to where they've gotten pretty good at faking Windows 7. And a lot of applications now require Windows 7 rather than older versions like XP. There are some user interface improvements. Wine always looks a little old. It looks like Windows 95 with a really low DPI, no matter what your actual monitor is. But the new user interface with 3.0, built-in mouse cursors have been redesigned, are available on a higher resolution for DPI screens. In desktop mode, higher display resolutions with different aspect ratios are supported. And there's other user interface improvements as well. Desktop integration, they have improved the way that clipboard sharing with Linux native applications work, or they say X11 applications, but yeah, clipboard will work a little bit better now. And there's all kinds of different improvements. One more down here I highlighted was their registry edit program. There is now importing and exporting capability, so you can import registry keys from an actual Linux machine into your Wine configuration. Oh, and then they have also implemented program data as a well-known directory, which I've seen some applications use program data. Not a lot, but some. So yeah, that and much more. Wine 3.0 seems like a big release. I've seen people on r/Linux talking about how they're able to get the Adobe Creative Suite, the newest version of it, running on Wine 3.0 way easier than they could on the previous version of Wine. So yeah, once again, I choose Linux native applications first, but if you know anyone out there who is held back by one or two Windows-only applications, otherwise they would be good to switch to Linux, definitely check out Wine 3, because it's a big improvement.
All right.
Cool. And then
that sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, Richard is going to close us out by talking about Nextcloud Talk, right?
Yes. So there's both the OMG Ubuntu article and the blog post. I was just going to mention the OMG Ubuntu article first, but basically in this, they just give a summary of some of the features it offers, and it's got almost everything as good as Google Hangouts, which is pretty cool, and you can run it in Nextcloud. So for those of you who don't know, Nextcloud is a self-hosted kind of service similar to like Google Calendar, Google Drive, all in one spot that you'd run on your own server, so you don't have to worry about it being managed somewhere else, and you know where all your data is, and you control that, and you could just run that on a VPS or something. Mm-hmm. And basically in this new feature, in the latest betas, they've got Nextcloud Talk working. And so what it can do, it has a lot of features. It's actually pretty cool. They have screen sharing, they have one-on-one calls, but also larger calls for meetings. And it actually is also supported in the latest versions of both the Android and the iOS apps for Nextcloud, which is pretty cool. This is not just a website only thing. Right. It's now supported across platforms.
Now, is it in the same Nextcloud app? I read that I think they made a separate app for Nextcloud Talk for Android and iOS. I'm not 100% sure.
I don't think I saw specifically if it was a separate one or not. Because I was looking at the blog post and he just says,
yeah, it is a separate app. I just looked it up.
Oh yeah, completely new Android and iOS apps. Yeah. Which makes sense because I was thinking if this is on Nextcloud beta, which it is, how would they have implemented it in the full main apps?
I'd rather it be implemented in the actual Nextcloud app personally, because I think that the Nextcloud app itself is pretty useless. But you know, it's still neat that you
Although
can
even
get
Google Voice is a separate app, right?
Yeah, but everyone makes fun of Google for how many different things they've got.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be cool if they could eventually integrate it in it. But for now, it's got some really awesome features.
Yeah.
So one of the cool things I also read is you can let people be invited as guests simply by sharing the link. So they don't have to have an account on your Nextcloud server, which is really awesome. And then they mentioned, so you can set them up. Meetings can be public or private with password protected. They can integrate directly into Nextcloud Calendar, and all calls are done peer-to-peer with end-to-end encryption, which is pretty awesome because this is open source, so we know what the code is underlying. We know it's 100% encrypted. And it's self-hosted, so you are in full control of your data. There's no metadata that is controlled by, say, like Telegram or WhatsApp or like those services where they still can see who's calling whom. They just, quote, can't see what's going on, which we're not sure since they're closed source. And I think that's one of most of the main features for now that I noticed that really stuck out to me. They have, I think I mentioned they have screen sharing, which was something I wanted to immediately look for when I saw that.
Yeah.
Because it was so long before Discord implemented screen sharing. It was something I really wanted.
Yeah, they do mention that this is replacing the Spree.me integration that they announced first back when the Nextcloud fork first happened. And back when that happened, I was immediately critical of implementing Spree into Nextcloud because it seemed like two different products. And it sounds like they recognized that that was an issue, and that's part of why they did this. So I am happy about that. I still kind of am put off by the fact that Nextcloud does so many different things. You know, it was originally OwnCloud was meant to be a file, just a web, like a Google Docs and Google Drive replacement. And I'm not sure if they have a good web editor anymore, or if they have one at this point in time, but they've gone and they've added calendars and email programs and now video chatting programs. At the top of their blog post, they say, they make some assertions about what users want. They say, you want to have a group chat. You want to have a video call. You want to call a person directly from within Nextcloud. You want to do this using the same login. And I personally kind of don't want that, you know. I don't want to have a group chat, and I don't want everything to go through the same login all the time. So the fact that they make those big assertions about what users want is kind of off-putting to me. At the same time, though, we really do need badly an open source video calling app right now, because me and Richard have, how many different video calling apps have we tried for this show?
Jitsi, Google Hangouts, Discord, and Skype, to name the first four that come to my mind.
Quite a few of them. And if Nextcloud if this is a decent service, then I might be tempted to make a Nextcloud server again so that I can take advantage of this and other features. So yeah, that is the last story that we had to talk about this week. And yep, like I mentioned before, these episodes are going to be a little bit shorter. I mean, this was a 47-minute episode. I think when we have less articles, we can actually talk about them in a lot more detail, though. So it's a little bit more quality. If you, as a viewer, want to talk to us about Linux news throughout the week, though, or if you want to talk to us about anything we did not cover in this episode, Nerd on the Street does have a Discord server at discord.knots.co. You have to go to that in a web browser to get the invite, and then after that, you can get to it through the Discord app. We've also got a subreddit, reddit.com/r/nerdonthestreet. If you want to submit stories for us to talk about there, any articles that you guys can help us find would be really appreciated. I mean, personally, I spend a lot of my free time between classes and things at school looking up Linux articles, but having some audience input on what you guys want us to cover would be helpful since we're not going to be covering as much. For now, though, hey, Richard, where can people go throughout the week if they want to find more of you?
Glorif22 on Twitter, and that's probably about it. I mean, I also run a few websites, but I'm going to update my main website eventually to keep it up to date, and I'm going to work on some updates both to Minecraft Media and the Launcher Media, my other two kind of main sites right now.
All right. And you can find me at JacobGKAU on Twitter, and you can find me in the rest of the videos over at nerdonthestreet.com. For now, though, that's everything we have to talk about. Keep using Linux, everyone. Have a good week. Bye.